Hello and welcome to today's VMware webcast. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to go over. First, we want to make this session as interactive as possible and encourage you to ask questions at any time using the question and answer box located to the left of the slides window. You can also use the question and answer box to get technical assistance if you should need it. The tabs located in the question and answer box are where you can find additional information about today's presentation. Today's presentation features streaming audio only, so there is no need to dial into a teleconference. You'll need to make sure that your computer speakers are turned up in order to hear the presenter and today's content. You can also fine-tune the audio by using the volume controls inside the media window. This presentation console allows you to interact and customize the layout to fit your viewing needs. You can collapse and expand any window on the console just like you would on your desktop by dragging the corners in or out. In addition, you can also maximize or close any of the windows on your screen by clicking the corresponding icon in the upper right-hand corner of each of the windows. At any time, you can reset the console to the default layout and access additional presentation functionality using the widgets at the bottom of your screen. Now, I'd like to turn things over to today's presenter to get things started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Strategies for Building Digital Infrastructure Resiliency. My name is Betty Janad, and I'm the Senior Director of Cloud Marketing here at VMware. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Gary Chen from IDC. He's the Research Director of Software-Defined Compute, and his research focuses on server virtualization, container infrastructure management, and cloud system software. Our session today is going to dig into the results of a recent survey conducted by Gary and his team into how enterprises are looking to build resiliency into their infrastructure and what the implications are for applications and IT management. Welcome, Gary. And with that, let's get started with the survey data.
Thanks, Betty. Glad to be here. Like you said, we did a study for you guys and some really interesting results. So we surveyed about 900 infrastructure and ops professionals. This was in October 2020, and it was across the globe. So it was North America, EMEA, and AP regions. It was mostly very large companies. So 81% of the sample was 5,000 plus employees. And it was a minimum of 2,500. So 25 to 5,000 for the rest of the 20% or so. And they're all director level and above. IT roles, we had director level all the way to C-level. And these people were responsible for infrastructure cloud operations for the most part. And then we had about a quarter of them that were architects as well. And they were also evenly split across all verticals. So a very representative sample. We have a lot of interesting insights about what people said, the future of compute, the future of cloud and their infrastructure. So let's get into this.
Yeah, that's a great representative slice of enterprise IT. Increasingly, we at VMware hear that it's all about the app. And I'd like to see what you kind of saw in the changes in the app landscape.
Yeah, so there are a lot of changes, and probably as a lot of people have heard, containers are the new hot thing. They're the new form of compute, and it's interesting. We see on this bar chart here. The percentage of containers, is already fairly sizable, but they're still bare metal and VMs. So it's largely kind of like a new type of compute, but the other ones are still around. So it's a pretty even mix, and it's interesting with containers. In that containers, a lot of people think of it as for new cloud native applications, and that's certainly a lot of the motivation. We found almost half, about 45% of apps that are in containers are basically re-platformed, who's kind of a lift and shift with minimal changes, or they're refactored in some way, but they're in existing applications that are moved to a container. So even within containers, there's a lot of diversity in what's actually in them.
So you mean, Gary, just, no changes to the app and just kind of repackaging them. So instead of being in a VM and being deployed, they're being deployed as containers.
Right. Yeah. Some apps are able to do that without a lot of changes. Some apps do require code changes or some level of refactoring to make them compatible. and just varies from app to app. And it's also what people want to accomplish with the app. Some people do intentional refactoring to try and gain more agility and such. And so, we looked at, what are the drivers for this, basically kind of explosive growth of containers and Kubernetes that's happening today. And these are the top 4 kind of drivers of why people are adopting containers and Kubernetes. So one interesting is security, right? So they're improving security. And security was also the top challenge. So there are things that containers can do for you to help you improve security, but containers is also like a new thing, and so people have to figure out how to secure it. But actually improving security, and when we talked with some customers, there's a couple of different things that they're kind of doing with that. One, containers with a container registry and all the metadata around what's in the container and the versions lets you kind of have this centralized inventory, so people have a better handle of what's deployed. It's all centralized in one place. What version? Am I using an old library or things like that? So that was one aspect. The other part is being able to patch and update faster. So a lot of container infrastructure is hooked into the CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines. And so when you do have to do a patch, like a security patch, then that can happen in a lot faster and a lot more automated fashion. And then containers go well with VMs by kind of basically adding another isolation layer. So if attacker was, took over a container, they would have to break out of the container to compromise the host, and then they would have to break out of the VM to compromise, at the hypervisor level. There's two layers, which is often a good strategy that a lot of people have, 2 layers of protection. And then the other reason we've seen for containers to improve security is really when you start moving from a monolith to microservices. And so, not every containerized app is a microservices-based architecture, but a lot of them are moving that way. And the reason why people say that's easier for security is that a monolith is basically one giant thing, and so you have to try and defend one thing all with the same sort of approach. And then when you break it up into microservices, then you can say, well, these are the critical parts, or this part has a different kind of function than this part, and we'll defend it in different ways. So that was another aspect of it. And then some of the other big things that we've seen is really standard kind of infrastructure drivers around what we call RAS, reliability, availability, and scalability. So that's something that's like still hard to do for a lot of people. With the current technology, we do have auto scaling and other things with VMs and cloud, but sometimes that's not as reactive as we want. It can be hard to set up. And so Kubernetes kind of takes that to another level. So, a very, very kind of, old kind of driver for infrastructure, but still something that, all infrastructure technology, I think, really still have to hit upon. And then finally, I think the last things has really been support for these new kind of exciting workloads, right? So one of the really, really big ones is all the stuff around artificial intelligence and machine learning and analytics and big data. So these are like very, very kind of bursty apps where they might need a lot of compute for a very short amount of time. That's really fits in well with containers. And they're often very modern apps, right? So they have a very modern workflow. They have a very fast pace of change. So people want to use containers. And then the other part is really kind of cloud native applications or microservices based applications. And containers are a really efficient way to package and ship software. So it's really like just ideal for microservices, which is, a smaller thing that fits in well with containers.
And, with all these new apps being created and all this interest in containers and microservices, are you seeing a shift in the infrastructure mix that it's landing on? Are cloud native apps landing mostly in the cloud?
Yeah, so that's a fairly complicated answer. The answer is not that simple, because what we've seen is that there are, public cloud is certainly a greater part of infrastructure, but we still have all the rest of infrastructure, right? So if you look at on-prem, in this graph here, it's still about 60% of people's deployments. And
Mm-hmm.
on-prem's definitely evolving, right? We have the traditional on-prem infrastructure, and then the other half of it is kind of evolving to more of a private cloud. So cloud has that, that impact on-prem as well. But in terms of like cloud native, I mean, probably, yeah, there's, public cloud probably has more affinity for cloud native, and maybe a traditional, legacy app that it may be in a container, but that tends to stay on-prem. But that's not really like a hard and fast rule, right? I mean, a lot of people move legacy applications to the cloud. A lot of people are running very modern apps on-prem. So
Mm-hmm.
while that may be kind of a general trend, it's not kind of like this hard rule of thumb. And the interesting thing when we looked at cloud, we found that people are starting to use more than one cloud. So it's pretty split. So about half of them, 53%, have one major public cloud provider, right? So they're kind of all in a one cloud. At least for now. In the future, maybe they go to another cloud for specific functionality or isolated use. But for now, they're in one major public cloud. And then the other half are really kind of in multi-cloud. Two to three is the most popular, but there's some people that are using 4 or more cloud providers. So there's really no one mode for infrastructure. Just like containers are another type of compute, cloud and increasingly multiple clouds are just another part of the total IT infrastructure, but it's additive to all of the traditional and private cloud that exist out there now.
And this truly seems that what IT organizations are doing is like taking advantage of all of the new choices that they have available to them and really picking and choosing, the right place for the right app or the service that they're looking for. It's also pretty consistent with what we're seeing with our own customers in that they're starting with hybrid, like figure out how to get to the first cloud. And then it may be for other reasons on, better availability, failover, et cetera, that they start to add other options.
Yeah, the thing is there's more choice than ever before. And there's a lot of specialization out there, right? Certain clouds and technologies and vendors are good at certain things. So people pick and choose, and they really can optimize, what is the best place, to put this app. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing with their apps, trying to figure out what is the best place for it. And so, like we said, like a lot of these new things are kind of additive. So here's an interesting one. People like, are containers, going to basically, make VMs, kind of disappear? And we haven't really found that to be the case. Certainly, as a percentage of compute, as containers grow, right, percentage of bare metal, percentage of VMs is going to go down. But if you look at the absolute numbers, of VMs, that is still growing from year to year. So 3/4 of the people are still continuing to grow, VM-based applications, both on-prem and in their public clouds, right? And it's only about 1/4 of them that are either kind of limiting it or shrinking it. So the thing is that VMs today are like, they're very, very stable, they're very mature. And over the past couple of decades, it's basically become kind of standard for enterprises. So there's a lot of tools that are out there in the ecosystem. There's a lot of skills, right? Everyone knows how to work with VMs. And so it's a very mature process for deployment and management. And so in some ways, it's a lot better for certain types of apps. Like you think of like a very traditional app, if it's monolithic and and it has certain assumptions built in, a VM could potentially even be a better place for that app than a container. And there's a lot of more simple applications that maybe you don't need the full power of Kubernetes behind that. So there's really not one compute approach that will fit everything. And this is for containers, right? Containers not going to fit for everything. So the old models still have their place, and there's no new model that's going to take over the world, whatever that new model is, right? Whether it's containers and then it's serverless. So it's really a pretty big spectrum of things that people are using, for different use cases.
Yeah, and it's really interesting in that, as you said, with each new thing that's come on, the share across, right? If you look at the total application portfolio, the share across where, the packaging format as well as where it's going to land, it subdivides that further, but it's not that anything, supplants another kind of model in its entirety. And from what I can tell from what you've shown me is that all of this is continuing to grow. So like with everyone's digital transformation initiatives, the infrastructure footprint across all forms is continuing to grow, as well as the application footprint, right? Enterprises are not writing fewer apps. They're continuing to write more apps, new apps, and add functionality to existing apps.
Yeah.
And that all has to run somewhere.
Yeah. The number of apps out there are exploding, right? It's sort of like it's exponential growth in the number of apps that are being built in like the next, 5 years versus what we've built in the past, 20 years. It's pretty amazing that the pace of that.
And with all of this kind of like diversity in portfolio and new technologies coming into the environment, what are the implications from, building and deploying is one thing, but what are the long-term implications around management, support, and operations?
Yeah, so we asked a lot about that, and so we'll talk about some of the things that are happening. So what's happening is that basically, like everyone is agreeing that the infrastructure complexity is growing, and so that's really going to cause management issues, right? So the environments are more diverse. They're more distributed. You have all these new technologies like containers. So it's on-prem, it's in multiple public clouds, and people are trying to integrate these things into a hybrid cloud, and that's one of the strategies to deal with that. There's a stat here: 84% believe it's important to implement this hybrid cloud strategy to get some kind of strategy of how do I manage this stuff across on-prem and public cloud. But it's kind of across, a lot of other things as well. And so 65% expect, this complexity, this huge increase in complexity that they're going to have to deal with. So it's more tools that they're going to have to use to manage these different environments, more skills of people that either are going to have to learn them or they'll have to hire, and more processes because you're just juggling more different things. And so there is a lot of complexity, and so that is one that's sort of like what they've established. There is complexity, and now it's how do I deal with this complexity? So some of the things we found is like, well, what are you really most concerned about? And so one is really this idea of consistency, because I have a lot of different environments and technologies, right? I got VMs and containers, and I'm going across on-prem and public cloud. So, can I have something to, not make all those things individual silos, right? And kind of do some kind of management across all those things. And so, we found though, that, managing consistent access and governance, and then across all those different clouds. These are basically the first and the last ones on this chart here. Those are kind of focused a theme around consistency, and then the middle two are really focused around concerns around skills, right? So you have people with existing skills, got new technologies coming in that they have to get acquainted with, and so there's obviously a lot of interest in people who know how to do containers and Kubernetes and microservices. And so, you can retrain staff to do that. You can hire others. Right now that's still kind of in short supply. That over the years that might get a little better, but for right now, it's a very, very high demand. And then the other part of it is like, can you do kind of more with the same amount of people? And especially when you have a really growing complex environment, you're basically going to get deluged with a lot of data, right? So what's happening in your environment, and you're trying to like use observability and better analytics to get a sense of like what's happening, right? So that is one thing, like how there's just too much data, and I have to make sense of it. So that's another big challenge that we've seen.
And even with all of these concerns and challenges, people are still forging straight ahead to containers and cloud, right?
Yeah, because I think a lot of the benefits are just too great, to deny. So it's not going to be an impediment. It's just, something that they have to solve for. And so one of the stats here is interesting is like people are starting to look at a common this term control plane, right, across all of these different things. Can I implement that to help me with this complexity? So 85% believe it's important to have that control plane, and almost half say it's like mission critical and very important. So it's really becoming a priority.
And, with your point on the control plane, with so many more elements now and components being part of this new environment, is it a one dashboard to rule them all? Is there room for specialization? Is the expectation that everybody across the operational teams will have depth and expertise across everything?
Yeah, so this starts kind of addresses some of that, right? I mean, it would be great, right, to have that one console, that one pane of glass to rule them all. That's probably like a little oversimplification. But I think what people are trying to do is to have a more consistent control plane where they can have that, right? So try and do some abstraction. So some of the things that people said that they're going to adopt to help with this management complexity. One of this idea of this cross cloud control plane, right? So they can apply this kind of policy-based governance across all of their different environments. And some of the other things that we talked about, like the analytics part, dealing with that data, right? How do I get actionable insights out of like a mountain of data, right? So they're really looking at AI and ML to help with that. So not only like containers like being used to run all of these ML and AI apps, they're trying to leverage that technology to help with the management as well. So that's sort of like an internal kind of infrastructure application of AI. And then the other thing we've seen is really kind of just more automation, right? So people just want to do things faster. You really just don't have time to do manual processes at this kind of scale. So more kind of infrastructure as code. Kubernetes, I think, is a big part of that. A lot of that philosophy is kind of embedded within the design of Kubernetes. So that's certainly one part of it. The other part that was interesting, I thought I saw in here was open source. So, kind of open source and open standards. I think open source has really played, a larger and larger role over the years, especially in that container kind of ecosystem and in various parts of cloud. So they're trying to leverage some of that as well. Those are great communities, and there's certainly also a lot of commercial support from vendors as well for people that need that.
Absolutely.
And so one of the other things that we've seen is that, as VMs and containers are both going to be around for the foreseeable future, and people are going to have to manage both, we've kind of seen this need for the coexistence of, a platform that can handle both, right? So in order to kind of master some of this complexity, we asked people, about kind of what's the convergence of VMs and containers. So, 55% of them said that it's going to be important to deploy both VMs and containers on a single infrastructure platform. And then on the right, you can see what are the benefits that they're going to get by doing that. So it's really around kind of staff productivity, increasing, security and compliance, kind of the RAS type features as well, kind of reliability and stability, kind of simplifying it for developers who might have to access both. So they want that kind of workflow to be kind of uniform. So there, there's a great number of things, and kind of management tools as well, reducing the tool set that people have to use. So a lot of people are kind of heading there to kind of unify these two things that are going to be around for quite a long time.
Yeah, and I think this brings up also some interesting patterns that I've heard from customers, in that it's not, it's oftentimes can be VMs and containers together, especially as you have an iterative modernization of a monolithic application, or, some elements may stay in a VM while you may start to use containers or even functions, right, to add functionality to that app. And if you didn't have some commonality, in this. You would have basically, components living in separate silos. Then you would kind of lose some of that visibility, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's very common today because a lot of people start out containerizing kind of stateless things. So maybe they do like the front end of the app,
Mm-hmm.
but the back end that's a database. There is a lot of kind of work to start containerizing those things, but a lot of times today it's running in a VM, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you are going to have these kind of hybrid compute type apps, yeah. And like you said, if they're in separate, if they're very very siloed, trying to manage performance and manageability across all the things, it's going to be a lot harder. So that's actually a pretty common case today that you do see, the database, the data layer of the app in a VM, and the rest in containers.
Yeah.
So kind of beyond the technology, looking at the kind of people element of this. That always, I think, plays a very large role in new technologies and transformation. So, it's really about um, having the people and the skills, and that's something that does take time. It's not going to happen overnight,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it could be training thousands of people before they can really be effective, to drive strategy and process. So some of the strategies that people are taking is, one, having the center of excellence. um, so you kind of start off with a kind of a leading edge group, and they do all the pioneering work, and then they start helping the rest of the organization of how they can follow in their footsteps. So we've seen that as really a popular thing. The other part is obviously training. So whether that's containers or Kubernetes or automation, trying to get these new modern skills into the workforce. And I think the other thing that we've really seen a big emphasis on is trying to just break down organizational silos in IT, right? And that's just something that's a perennial problem in IT, or really any organization, right? And so we've been trying to constantly do that. But now we're seeing that, you don't really want to have a separate team for VMs and containers, like we mentioned, there's all these apps across both.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's oftentimes teams that do on-prem, and other teams that do public cloud. So I don't think it's going to be this utopia where like there's some group that that handles everything. Right? There's going to be specialization. People are going to focus on one thing or another, and certain people maybe really just kind of focus on one side. But I think having commonality and collaboration where it makes sense, and increasingly we are seeing those overlaps, where there are stretched apps that go across on-prem and cloud. There are apps that go across multiple public clouds, and there are apps that go across VM containers. So people are going to have to work together, and I think the better people can organize around collaboration, and
Mm-hmm.
doing that. And you're kind of understanding that, yeah, you can only take that so far, and let's just do it where it makes sense to do it. And that nothing is ever going to be perfect, but the breaking down of silos definitely was raised a lot by the respondents in the survey. Something that they're really actively trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. In some senses, with containers and such, we've got this nice separation of concerns that was possible. But increasingly, yeah, you're seeing, like you say, like collaboration and more points for integration in different places, places where you are, with all this choice, you are able to leverage all the different things into one application architecture. Now, then what does that mean from operationalizing that? So I think it's the people part, from skilling up teams to do new things, as well as operationalizing that over time, has always been kind of the hardest part of new technology, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so in summary, some of the things that we've seen, to kind of recap it, right? So infrastructure, right? We got more types of compute coming, with containers. There's more clouds that are coming, multiple clouds, and cloud coming to on-prem in the form of private clouds, and even kind of remotely managed local clouds. And a lot of this is basically supporting all of these new type of apps that people want to run, cloud native, AI, as well as still addressing some of the core infrastructure factors, right? RAS, reliability, availability, and security. But I think a lot of that is really kind of how to do that while managing risk and uncertainty. So that still drives all the infrastructure, whether that's containers or not, or cloud or not. So it is definitely, all these new things are definitely additive. People are managing a bigger mix of things. Individual companies may have slightly different mixes, but I'm betting that most of them are going to be in the camp of I have some of everything in some form or another, right? I mean, some may be more heavily on-prem, more public cloud, but it's hard to find someone now that's all one thing or another. So nothing's really going away. VMs aren't going away. The legacy apps are not going away. Some of them are going to re-platformed or refactor for containers and move to the cloud. And there's a lot of new cloud native action that's happening on-prem as well. So kind of a mixed world. And then, for the implications for management, like you said, this breeds complexity. And so some of the solutions that are people are really trying to do more automation. I think Kubernetes is a big part of that. A lot of the clouds are really built for automation. More AI and ML analytics to make sense of data, provide actionable insight. And this theme of just more consistency, whether that's across cloud, on-prem, VM containers, right? Having a common platform or having a common control plane, to help kind of iron out some of the inconsistencies between these platforms. And then the other part is what we've seen is really the factor of people, right? And the processes and skills. So, there's an investment in those tools and training, and figuring out the right org structure, how to manage that. So, breaking down those silos, and we've seen that in trends like DevOps and DevSecOps, trying to bring those things into a more collaborative process. So a lot of change happening, a lot of complexity happening, but certainly not stopping people from doing these kind of exciting new technologies. So so we're seeing just a huge push in cloud, huge push in containers and cloud native. So that was the results of our survey, and hope you found that interesting. I thought there were some pretty interesting results there, and people on a pretty exciting journey, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's thanks, Gary. That was very insightful information. It's really interesting to see how basically, people are running full steam ahead into cloud and containers, but the stuff they have, the type of architectures and technologies they've had all this time is still continuing to grow. It'll be exciting to see what comes next, and B, what does that mean for this, increasingly diverse portfolio. And we at VMware specifically, we have had our whole history comes from helping people embrace, diverse IT portfolios. Initially, we started off with helping people embrace diverse infrastructure hardware, operating system, and workloads. And it's continuing to evolve. And last week, we announced the next evolution of that strategy with VMware Cloud. And I'd like to spend the next few minutes to tell you a little bit more about that. And why this evolution, really, because as Gary pointed out, in the survey that he ran, and also some research that we've done into our own customer base, is that, the cloud adoption isn't slowing down. And last year, 2020, with the pandemic, it greatly accelerated digital transformation initiatives for every organization across all sectors, across all sizes, and with really an emphasis on transforming applications from the perspective of modernizing the ones that they have. How do they build more functionality to them, as well as building new ones quickly and continuously. But organizations want to be able to do that quickly, not sacrificing on speed, because we learned that we need to respond faster, deliver services faster, and not being tied down or locked in. As Gary showed, that there is, today IT organizations have a plethora of choices. It is kind of the golden age of options from infrastructure and application services, and they want to be able to take the best components that they need to build the best application to serve their customers, but also be able to do that while maintaining the SLAs and SLAs that their customers expect and the compliance that they need to adhere to from a regulatory perspective. But as we all know, change can be slow and painful at times because, what we have is we're adding new technology into an already very complex portfolio, and adding new things into a large portfolio adds complexity and risk. And things like rewriting applications is time consuming, because there could be, as we talked about, available skill sets. Some of the new architectures and technologies have been around for less than a decade, and only in recent years has gained kind of mass market appeal. And so in that sense, the skills are just not there to do some of these things in mass. And migrating existing applications to the cloud is often not as simple as just a pick it up and move it. So there are many of these things, there are challenging. And then also once they do that, how will they manage that sustainably over time? So these are all things that can slow down and increase risk related to this transformation. So where do we go from here? Those realities are really some of the reasons behind the driving principles for VMware Cloud. VMware Cloud is our solution designed for multi-cloud environments that's optimized for the broad range of applications. Existing applications in VMs that could be monolithic apps that the company has built themselves, or applications that have come from third-party ISVs, to new cloud-native microservices that they're building today. To address the needs of both developers and IT operators along the full life cycle, because they're inextricably linked, right? In order to make that, to get the RAS that we want for the environment and the applications, to be able to run anything you would like. For any combination, within any combination of the data center, your remote sites, and across any public clouds, because it is about, what is the best place to run my thing based on the people that I need to serve, the customers I need to serve, and then the services that I would like to consume to make that app great. And the ability to manage both the infrastructure and the applications, regardless of the type of applications, and to truly be able to unify the management and operations without sacrificing choice. So how much can be brought under a common compliance policy, as well as leaving enough freedom for the development teams and the operations teams to be able to build and deploy the right thing and to run that in the right place. So when you look at that, VMware Cloud is really about allowing you to run all of the things, from traditional apps to new modern applications, and be able to do that with build new applications with a rich set of application services, frameworks, and tools for the developer to help them build and deploy quickly. A broad set of cloud and app management capabilities that span across the data center, private cloud, hybrid cloud, and multi-public cloud scenarios, whether they be VMs or container-based applications that need to be managed, and to help manage services that are packaged by VMware-based VMs and containers, or running natively in public cloud and using the public cloud services, so that there can be common policy, common governance, and a common set of kind of configuration and compliance, with some level of unified dashboard, so that you can see VMs, containers side by side from one platform, but then be able to also dig really deep into service delivery from a VM standpoint, and troubleshooting, et cetera, and all the way down to containers. So depending on the operations team specialty, they have the tools that they need to be able to do all of the functions that they need to do. And last but not least, VMware Cloud provides a rich set of cloud infrastructure capabilities, from modern compute, network storage, and security. And that's available in over 4,000 cloud sites around the world from every major cloud provider, allowing direct access to the rich inventory of services available from those clouds, as well as that same infrastructure layer can be deployed on any any data center, any server that would be under that the customer manages directly, that the company manages directly, or remote sites, providing a common layer. And all of that really to deliver choice, speed, and control for any organization. The focus here for VMware Cloud is to help accelerate app modernization by increasing developer productivity, with the developer tools and frameworks, so that they can ship more software faster, securely, and enable a faster response to doing things like patching vulnerabilities and addressing issues, to accelerate the move to cloud-based models, whether it is to a public cloud or transforming the private data center into a private cloud, so that you can get cloud capabilities and cloud operating models for your infrastructure. Specific to migration, we've been able to help customers migrate thousands of workloads, thousands of applications in mere months without any recoding, because they're able to take, for the applications that are in VMs and will continue to remain in a VM size VM packaging, help them migrate them without any recoding, leveraging the same team and skills. And lastly, with the ability to make the best use of budget, time, and resources. So enterprise security at the lowest possible TCO, getting the best reutilization and consolidation of infrastructure, being able to get financial optimization so that the spend across clouds or use of on-premise resources is best optimized, and getting operational efficiency across the teams, so that, as the portfolio grows, there is sustainability in supporting and maintaining this growing app and infra portfolio over time. And with that, I would like to thank Gary for joining us today on this webinar and sharing the results of the survey. And you can learn more about the survey results by downloading the IDC study itself. You can see that on the left. If you would like to learn more about VMware Cloud, we just recently announced VMware Cloud at our Leading Change event, and that event is now available on demand and can be watched at that link there. And to learn more about how VMware can help with cloud and app transformation, you can visit the website and download the latest ebook. And with that, it's time for some questions. All right. So we've got a question in here, and I think this is specifically as we talk about, cloud migration and such and multi-cloud, this is a really great, timely question in that, how do you see PHI data moving from on-prem to cloud in, Europe? And I think, Gary, this is more than just a regional conversation, because it's very much tied to the regulations of a specific industry.
Right.
So what kind of patterns have you seen?
Yeah, I think a lot of that will be dictated by, like you said, individual regional compliance requirements. But certainly, health data is something that's people in that industry really concerned about, about where that lives. And I think probably in the EU they have probably even stricter laws around that than the US. And a lot of that does prevent that from moving to cloud, or that cloud would have to be kind of a more specific cloud to healthcare rather than a general cloud. So we have seen the trend of industry clouds popping up. So there's government clouds and financial clouds. So certain it may have to stay within a certain physical location. Those clouds are built to comply with certain security requirements and isolation requirements and things like that. So even if the current situation right now for the easiest way for most people is to leave it on-prem, I think in the future cloud will probably become a more viable option if it's not today. So I think that's something we've broadly been seeing is much more tailored clouds to these specific use cases that today maybe aren't possible.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. It may stay on-prem, but another thing we've also seen is like the evolution of the on-prem definition. It doesn't always mean a data center that you manage. It could be an outsourced data center, and from the VMware side, we've partnered with folks like Dell EMC. So it's a fully managed service, kind of with that same infrastructure. The operating model from that perspective is a cloud operating model, subscription, et cetera. But the organizations are able to keep it on premise. So they get the operating model benefit of cloud, but the data gravity of on-prem. And what's interesting is I'm going to add another example is it really depends on the organization and what they're doing, because in some senses it could be maybe the transaction can happen in the cloud, so you might have some of the front end stuff, but the data resides on-prem. And then for certain industries, like gaming or what have you, it's like everything has to happen kind of in the location. So it's the best is that with across the cloud and kind of application ecosystem, there's so many options so that people can put together the right mix to get the agility and or operating benefits that they would like.
Yeah, that's a great example you gave. So we at IDC we've been calling that kind of local cloud. So there's a private cloud, which is like what people kind of build and manage themselves. And our term local cloud kind of means it is really an extension of a public cloud platform. So a public cloud, but it's in your data center, it's on-prem, managed remotely, but it's still that same kind of cloud environment. So you get the benefits of the cloud, but you can still fulfill that, hey, it's on-prem or it's some, it's dedicated, it's not multi-tenant and things like that. So that's really an emerging kind of deployment model. And we've actually seen quite a lot of interest in that recently. There's been a lot of vendors with offerings in that space. And customers are really interested for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one for it's kind of these compliance and really tough to, kind of high security workloads and data, as well as things like, edge and distributed kind of, remote office, branch office, managing that as well. So, that's going to be an interesting one going forward.
Yeah. Another quick question here is, why wouldn't someone plan for all their apps to just be modernized and put in containers?
That would be nice, right? With every kind of technology, just throw away everything that kind of exists and start brand new, and that's just not, that's just not practical. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, you have a lot of existing apps that can't be put into containers for kind of compatibility reasons, or it requires a lot of effort of code changes to be put into a container, and so people have to balance that, right? How much changes do I have to make to get benefits of containers versus the risk of doing that, especially if it's a very large, complex, old application. So you just have this legacy, kind of thing. And, and containers is kind of unlike virtualization, where virtualization was basically made to be transparent to the application and kind of backwards compatible, right? So it just kind of emulates that server hardware. But containers have some compatibility with the existing stuff, but it's not always fully kind of transparent and backwards compatible. So not everything existing can be put into a container. And then even for new things, right? You look at this kind of modern application deployment pattern of microservices and containers. It can fit. It's great for a lot of things, but I think it's kind of it's very difficult to say that any one model of compute or any one architecture is going to be perfect for everything, right? So, I think microservices, that sort of architecture, that's great for like a large scale app, right? That gets you a lot of benefits, solves a lot of problems with managing apps at scale, but not every app, is a Google scale app, right? So when you have a smaller app, then maybe microservices doesn't always make sense. A monolithic app for a small app can be faster. And a lot of people kind of start with a monolith. And if it grows to a scale, when you do V2 of the app, V3, then you can, move to microservices. But maybe, in the beginning, microservices is just a lot of overhead when you don't really know, even where those service boundaries should be or how successful this app is going to be. So it's kind of hard to say that. So, I still think that people who are doing kind of more traditional app development and monolithic apps, depending on the requirements of the app, and every app is so different, and it's hard to say that, not necessarily the wrong approach, but certainly for a certain class of apps, to be modern and microservice based and cloud native and containers, can be the right approach. But I don't think it's ever going to be one thing, right? There's going to be apps that are in VMs. There's going to be apps that are serverless or functions as a service. There's going to be a whole blend of things, and containers, microservices is great for a lot of things, but it's never going to be like 100% take over the world.
Yeah, it is. It's one of those things that with every technology, there's kind of there's a fit for purpose type of thing, right? You want to use the right thing to get the to meet the architecture, and it's the policy to be dogmatic is not going to be one that works well, because each thing, like you say, requires a level of effort, and it's about the value stream for that functionality. And so, what I've seen is like for a monolithic app, you're not gonna rewrite the whole thing, could decompose the whole thing. You may decompose some parts that need to rev quickly because it's the highest value to the customer. And then some things may end up as functions because it's event driven and it doesn't need to be even as long lived as a container. So that's a great way. So that just take it from your application's point of view. What's, what is that what purpose is that application serving, and the level of effort it takes to apply the different type of application architectures and tools. Let's see here. There's a question here from someone regarding just what steps would they suggest for a company, a few hundred people. They're currently running their own data centers in place, and would like to kind of get rid of the data center and start converting over to some SaaS. I can give a VMware pitch on how we have lots of great solutions for that. But for folks who have existing VM footprint on premise, the VMware Cloud solution, what that provides for organizations is that same footprint of infrastructure stack, compute, network, storage that you have on premise in the public cloud providers. So there is VMware Cloud on AWS, also on Azure, Dell EMC, Google, Oracle, IBM, Alibaba, and a global network of VCP partners, some of which be, so if you need a local data center in a country, et cetera. Because you have that same infrastructure layer, you're able to migrate those existing workloads. And they have kind of all the same functionality. So that's kind of like, that as a great way to start. We have tools like what we call HCX that allows for bulk migration. And I've even heard from customers that once they kind of have that environment set up, they've been able to even do vMotion from the on-prem into the cloud, which is really pretty exciting, as you start to kind of get all those environments set up. Let's see here.
The person has kind of an interesting, he's from a smaller company, right? The person that asked this, and actually most of our data was from large companies. Most of them were like 5,000 and above, and I think we had some that were like maybe 1,000 or 2,500. I think the situation is, when you look at kind of more in the SMB segment, I think they definitely have a lot different kind of issues than some of the large companies. And, I think for a smaller company like that, we do often see more kind of now fully cloud centric kind of strategies for IT, where kind of the larger companies, they really are going to have a mix. And they can't necessarily just be fully cloud based, but for a small company, that can be more practical. And oftentimes it's a lot better because the smaller company, they often have a lot more kind of resource constraints in terms of people and the types of skills that they have. So trying to manage your own infrastructure and things like that, some of those are just kind of very low value tasks. And so, to kind of have a leaner kind of IT team is like, let's offload a lot of the heavy lifting to the cloud, right? Focus on our business, focus on the applications and things like that. So, I think in that segment, we definitely see a lot more 100% kind of cloud companies, where you rarely see that with large enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like where, if you have a IT team of like 10 people, right? And you want your focus to be on differentiated work or optimizing the spend to resources and availability and scale versus I need to rack and stack, when that is where you can get an economies of scale by, leveraging that infrastructure as a service. I think the important part, and you touched on it a bit, is that it's low level work. So much of it can be offloaded to the cloud. However, that just changes the role of IT and the things that they need to govern, because it doesn't mean that everything goes away. The performance and other things are performance and speed. So there's other areas in which the IT team now works on optimizing the environment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let the IT people focus on kind of higher value stuff. And I think most of them actually kind of, by moving to the cloud, they actually get better availability, reliability, and security. I think at smaller firms, they can do that to some extent, but I think that generally improves when they move to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, let's focus on, managing the service and optimizing it and things like that.
Yeah. And one last question here is, if I'm already using AWS or Azure for cloud, what do I get with VMware Cloud? And that is a great question. So with VMware Cloud, when we saw in the diagram that we showed there, there are virtual machines, VMs, as well as containers and Kubernetes as part of VMware Cloud. There's also direct connections into this rich set of services that the cloud providers already provide. Because as we talked about, if you're taking your existing workload to the cloud, and then you want to enrich that with, Redshift or use the cloud IoT services. Using VMware Cloud allows for that kind of migration and modernization to those native services in cloud happen. There's also, from the management portfolio part of VMware Cloud, there is the ability to optimize your public cloud spend. And then as well as managing kind of your hybrid cloud, overall hybrid cloud operations. So there's a lot there. What we want to do is provide the power of and to our users, so that we help you with the applications you have and be able to leverage all of what's available across the cloud and container ecosystem, and to build the apps for your future. Any final thoughts, Gary? It was really great to have you on here for the discussion, and the data is super fascinating.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And the full survey results will be available at that link that you showed, so people can certainly peruse that later. And there's a lot more data that I didn't even show, but I think it's certainly an interesting time in IT, especially coming out of the pandemic. Certainly, mm-hmm. I think that we'll have a lot of long-lasting effects on IT strategies. I think we've seen people moving to more cloud-centric kind of strategies. I think it was already heading there, but I think it kind of got sped up a little. And then I think people are really starting to look at kind of now digital agility and digital resiliency, right? Because pandemic kind of like opened up a lot of, showed up people a lot of their weaknesses of really how fast they can react to something and react to changes. So I think people will start looking for solutions, which cloud and containers and Kubernetes, all of this, help address, is like, how can they be more agile? How can they be more resilient? Because, mm-hmm. Who knows, something else will happen at some point in the world. And and businesses are going to have to adjust to keep themselves going. So I think a lot of the focus is really be looking at that through that kind of digital agility resilience type lens.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree. It's COVID didn't slow anything down. In fact, it just kind of accelerated all of the initiatives, because the primary way for interaction was all through mobile and web type of experiences. And so I think it's been great to see how the entire industry has stretched in this. And it'd be great to see like what new types of things come out of this, as we go into, throughout the rest of 2021 and into 2022. So with that, thanks everyone for joining today. Thank you, Gary, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.